Men and women are better together. It's God's design. We all need to look into ourselves and determine what our responsibility is. What are we contributing to the divide? And what do we need to do to ensure that we are creating a better future? One where we treat each other with dignity and respect, as partners and co-laborers. In this episode of the Ministry and MeToo Learning Journey, author DeVon Franklin explores insights from his new book, The Truth About Men. DeVon helps us understand men's struggle with lust and the challenges they face in their interactions with women. He explains why negative male behavior patterns exist, how those patterns can lead men to act against their vows, their integrity, and even their character. DeVon Franklin is an award-winning film and television producer, committed to lifting up the masses through positive entertainment. Formerly Senior Vice President of Production for Columbia Pictures, DeVon is now President and CEO of Franklin Entertainment, a multimedia entertainment company. Named one of the most influential Christians under 40 by BeliefNet, he is also an author of multiple best-selling books. Let's hear from DeVon as he helps us understand the truth about men.
A couple months ago, I was on the promotional trail for my previous book, The Hollywood Commandments, which was a spiritual guide to secular success. And while I was on the tour talking about that book, I had an interview with Maria Shriver. And Maria Shriver, after the interview was over, that was right around the time when the Harvey Weinstein incident was breaking out. That news was breaking out all around the world. And after that interview, her and I just started having a casual conversation about the incident. And I said off the cuff, I've always wanted to write a book called Are Men Really Dogs? And she's like, what? And I said, well, here's why. And I began to explain this theory and this idea that I have about manhood that I began to realize when I looked inside about what was going on with men. And after I told her what I thought this idea was about, she said, you have to write that book right now. And I said, no, I just wrote a book, Maria. I'm not writing another book. And I said, it's dangerous work to write a book about what men need to do better, because I'm a man and I can tell you we don't like looking in the mirror. And I'm a man, from the Christian community and in the faith community, and me coming out and talking about my own issues related to what men deal with and the fact that I struggle, I could literally get ostracized from the very community that embraces me currently. So my first response to her was no. But then, as God would have it, as I left that meeting, what she said stayed in my spirit. Write this book. So I sat down, I wrote 4 pages of a kind of like a book proposal. And unbeknownst to me, all these things started coming up about this idea. And so I sent it to my book agent. My book agent says, I don't know where this came from, but we are going to go do this because the world needs this message. And so as I began to write the book, it required me to go deeper inside than I ever had before. And here is my conclusion. Are men really dogs? Of course not. But I believe that every man has a dog within them. What is a dog? It is lust. Now, in the church community, the L word is almost like saying the F word in some instances. But I think it's time for us as a church to have an honest conversation and tell the truth. As the word says, the truth will set us free. I believe every man has lust in them. Lust is selfish. Lust wants what it wants, when it wants it, how it wants it. Let me give you a level set and a definition of lust. I believe that lust is an impulse for sexual, financial, personal, or professional pleasure by any means necessary, even if those means are personally, professionally, or spiritually detrimental. This is my definition of lust. And I believe that when lust goes untrained, unchecked, unmanaged in men, it behaves very similar to an untrained dog that has no discipline. Now listen, for the dog lovers out there, you may shudder at the idea that I am equating the lowest part of a man with a dog. I want to be very clear. An untrained dog, as cute as it may be, is a nuisance and a danger to everyone it comes in contact with. Because on the outside, it can be cute. But when there's no discipline, it has no regard for environment or the people that it's with. It wants what it wants when it wants it and will stop at nothing until it gets it. And let me tell you, lust in men operates very similarly. But there is also hope. Every dog has a master. So I believe in us as men, we don't only have lust, we also have love. Love of self, love of God, love of the woman in our life, love of family, love of community. So in order for us as men to be successful, we have to learn to master the dog. We have to learn to put love in control of lust. Why do we see so much going on in our culture related to men behaving badly, even if those men are in the church? Because that lust in that man is driving that man's decision. And as a result, the love in that man, the master in that man, is subject to the ways of the dog, subject to the ways of lust. So in order for us as men to be who we were called to be the men that God created us to be, my theory and my thesis is we must master the dog. We must put love in control of lust. But before we get into, all of the solutions, I just want to share a personal story. I'm the middle child of 3 boys, and my father was an alcoholic pretty much my entire life, and all of our entire lives, actually. And when I was 9 years old, he passed away of a heart attack when he was 36. And so me and my brothers, it was a traumatic experience. We were completely devastated. And it took a long time for us to heal from the loss of our father, losing him at such a young age. When I got into my teenage years, I found a picture at one of my cousins' houses of my mother, my father, and a female family member. Now, what was fascinating about this particular picture was in the picture, my mother, my father, and the female family member were all sitting on the same bed, but each had very different expressions. My father and the female family member were smiling. My mother looked completely distraught. When I looked at the picture, her expression was so off-putting to me, I began to inquire, what's going on in this picture? As I asked and as I inquired, I finally got an answer that I actually was not planning for. Come to find out that my father had an affair with another member in the family, another female member in the family, and my mother in this picture had just found out about it. So here I am as a teenage boy realizing this about my father and getting this information, and I began to ask the question, well, wait, if my father, who I know, even though he struggled with alcoholism, I know he loved my mother, how could he cheat on her? What is going on? And I began to ask the question, can a man be faithful? I would ask this to all of the women in my family. Please tell me, can a man be faithful? And they would tell me, no, 99% of all men cheat. I said, what? You guys say this like it's some law of the universe. I don't understand. Why? They said, well, that's just the way men are. And I said, no, I refuse to believe it. So as a teenager, I became obsessed. Can I be the 1%? What's going on inside of us? I love the Lord. I'm saved, sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost. But how do I not allow what I came to discover was in me run and rule my life? Now, I've been in the church my whole life. I love the church. The man I am today is because of the church. But as I got older into adolescence and then adolescence into adulthood, I began to realize that I would have these unhealthy, impure urges and thoughts. But in the church, nobody would talk about how to deal with it. In the church, we were just taught, cast that negative thought down. You know what? Just pray it out. Well, the Bible says that faith without works is dead. So if we only have faith over something, but we don't put practical works behind it, the Bible tells us that combination may not bear much fruit. So as a kid trying to figure out how do I deal with what I feel is going on inside, there was no one to turn to. So as a result, what I began to realize was that I found, I found my, not so much solace, but I began to try to learn how to deal with it in a way that was very unhealthy. As a young man growing up, we're taught, even in the church, the more women that you have, the better. So as a young man, I thought in dating, hey, the more women I have, I'll feel more like a man. But what I realized was it wasn't making me feel more, it made me feel less. because the hole in my soul was not being filled by anything external. So what I began to realize is that as I began to buy into the world's idea of manhood, I was suffering in silence. I didn't have a place to go. And if I dared mention to anyone in my faith community that I was struggling with lust, I would risk being ostracized. And it's the same fear that most men hide behind today. Because if we actually were honest, all men, and I say all without fear of successful contradiction, deal with this issue of lust. Deal with the dog. And let me tell you, let me break a few myths for you right now that I thought, hey, I get married, I say I do, whew, I don't have to worry about this dog anymore. It's gonna go to sleep. It's gonna be, you know what, I won't have any more thoughts about other women. I won't have these impure thoughts about, greed and power. It'll all go away. I got married currently. I've been married just about 7 years, and I got married and I said I do, and I said, whew, it's over. I don't have to struggle anymore. Well, after a few months, I realized the dog was just put to sleep. Marriage didn't take the dog away. And then as I'm in marriage and I love my wife, I have no intention of ever cheating on her. I have no intention of wanting another woman. But why was I finding myself having these desires and looking at other women or being on Instagram and seeing a scroll and instead of moving off the picture, my eyes stayed focused even though I'm happily married? What is going on? And so I began to realize, hey, if I think that my standing as a man in the faith community, if I think that just because I may have all these quote unquote accolades that I am above the ways of the dog, I am seeing it wrong. So I began to realize that pride is what keeps us sometimes as men from doing the work and seeking the help that we need. So this is one of the reasons why I wrote this new book, The Truth About Men, what men and women need to know, because I believe as men, we can become better. How do we do this? How do we not allow our thoughts to get control? How do we not give ourselves over to this thing in us that wants what it wants? And what I also realized was this: if I don't do my work, if I don't take personal accountability and responsibility for what's going on inside me, I will become a liability to my wife, to my family, to my community. How? Because if I don't manage this lust, if I don't master this dog, I will become whatever it wants me to be. It is that strong. When you look at the world, one of the things that people ask me is, how are we seeing how are so many men that are so prominent and so intelligent in some regard have such a blind spot to their own behavior? And I said, it's these three words: explanation, rationalization, and normalization. I believe that all of us have an internal alarm system. The Bible tells us that even if we have never read the scriptures are in our heart. So we know right and wrong. Whenever we do something that's wrong, the internal alarm system starts to go off. And whenever we do something that's wrong, a lot of times that internal alarm system makes us feel guilty or shameful. Because those feelings are so loud within our spirit, we don't want to hear the alarm going off. So the first thing we do is we explain the facts that led to the wrong that we did. Once we explain those facts, we then begin to rationalize it. Well, it's okay. It was just one time. You know what? It's all right. No one's ever going to find out. It's okay. They knew who I was. They know I'm a man. It's all right. We rationalize behavior we know isn't right. And when we do it often enough, the alarm stops ringing. Once the alarm stops ringing, that behavior that initially would set off the alarm now becomes a normalized part of our behavior. So much so that we no longer are in touch. We have a blind spot to behavior that is not only detrimental, but it's also destructive. Explanation, rationalization, and normalization. I believe these three words are what is transforming us as men, not into the men we were created to be, but it is allowing us to stay regulated to this lust, to this dog. But I believe that we can do something about it. There is hope, not only for men, but for women too. One of the reasons why I wrote this book is because it's important to realize we're in this together. Too often we talk at one another, we don't talk with one another. Communication is key, especially within our communities of faith, because too often we come into an environment like the church, and we actually, listen, my day job is I make films, I produce films, so I'm dealing with make-believe all day long. I'm dealing with productions all day long. But the greatest production happens in the church, because we come into the environment not being who we really are, not being honest with our struggle, and just trying to present an image so that others will find us acceptable. And my hope and belief that if the church is to be the church that God called us to be, we have to usher in a new level of truth, which means we have to be honest what we're dealing with. So in order to master the dog, here are a few tips that I believe are proactive, that can help us get control over what some believe is an uncontrollable issue. The first thing you need to know is the dog never goes away. It never goes away. It's like Paul saying, I had this thorn, I prayed that it would leave 3 times, and the only word that came back from God was, my grace is sufficient for you. So I need you to know that this dog, this lust doesn't go away. This is why it must be mastered. It must be trained, because if you don't master the dog will master you. The second thing is we have to accept, we have to be aware of it, and we have to accept it. Anything that we don't confront, we empower to destroy us. Anything we suppress, anything we're in denial about, we actually give that thing more power. And one of the reasons why I believe this lust is so strong in our community is because we've been suppressing it. We've been denying it. We've been saying, no, not me. Do you think that I feel comfortable standing before you and being very honest and transparent, saying, hey, no matter who you may think I am, I have this lust in me. I have this dog in me. Does that make me feel good? No. But guess what? I desire to be the man God called me to be, greater than I care about someone judging me because I'm being transparent. So I'll take the judgment if it means my own personal freedom and allowing me to go to where God called me to be and be the man he called me to be. I'll take the judgment, and I'm hoping you'll take the judgment too, because it's worth it. Others who will look at you for your honesty are the same ones that need to be honest themselves. So what I began to realize is we have to be aware that this is an issue, and we have to accept it. So what happens when I accept that there's something going in me, when you accept that there's something going on in you that doesn't align with who you want to be and doesn't take you where you want to go, you now can deal with it. Because if you go to the doctor and you know that you're sick, and the doctor says, tell me what's wrong with you, and the response is, oh, nothing, I'm fine, the proper treatment cannot be administered. So in order for us to get the victory, in order for us to master the dog, in order for us to get victory over lust, we have to admit that this is in us. Why is it in us? I cannot wait to get to heaven and ask God. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a way to keep us humble, because as men, we certainly sometimes have an issue with humility. So maybe he just allowed us to have it, even though women have it too. I can only speak from a male perspective. So why it's that way, we'll ask him when we meet him, okay? However, we just have to learn how to accept it and be aware of it, which is really, really important. The antidote for the dog is mastery. In every man, that master is the man that God created them to be. The man that loves their family, loves their community, that is committed to the greater good, a man that practices sacrifice. Love is a deep feeling of affection that compels selflessness. So when we, as men, learn mastery, we learn to put the greater good above our own need. And this is so important because, again, lust wants us to operate based upon what we want in any moment. And when we do that, so often as men, we can become accustomed to reorienting every situation based upon our need. And when we do that, it's dangerous, because if a situation doesn't conform to what we want, we then get mad, we get angry, we get frustrated. Why? Because the dog is in control. So in order to rob control or steal control back from the dog, we have to remember that it is okay to say, there's something in me that's stronger than the dog. The love in me, the love of God, the love of myself, the love of the woman in my life. I love them so much that even though this dog is barking, even though I'm having a feeling, I am not going to act on that, because if I act on it, it will destroy everything I hold dear. And in order for us to be the men that we were called to be, we have to practice putting love in control of lust daily. That's what mastery is all about. Now, it's cool to wax poetic and give all of these, beautiful soliloquies, but I want to give you something practical in order how to deal with it, because here is something we don't even talk about much in the church community at all. Most of the time, lust takes the form of an urge, the impulse I talked about earlier. This impulse to do something that we know is wrong, this impulse to go against who we profess to be, go against the word that is in us, because what we want in us is so strong. Here's what I believe in terms of the quality of our life is directly related to urge management. The more successful we are at managing urges, the more successful we will be in life. So, but in the church, we never talk about urges. We never talk about, what do you do when you start to feel something that is not the love in you talking, it's the lust. So I want to give a few quick tips on how to deal with urges. 1, feel the urge, but don't act on it. So often in our communities of faith, we're taught to suppress urges. I believe the opposite will lead us to victory. Feel it. You know what? Hey, I don't know why this thing came on me. I'm feeling this right now, but instead of getting mad at myself, judging myself, shaming myself for feeling it, I feel it and say, hey, it's here. So when you feel it, you give it a chance to pass. It's like being in a meeting and you're hungry, but you can't eat yet. You have a hunger pain, but when you acknowledge you're hungry and you say, hey, I will be able to eat momentarily, or you know what, right now is not the time to do that. We allow the pain to pass. Same thing with urges. I do believe that a suppressed urge persists, but an urge that is acknowledged will pass. Important thing, feel it, but don't act on it. Second thing, take a 10 count. Literally, when something comes on you, when that dog starts barking, take a 10 count. Because what will happen is, when the dog barks, it wants its impulses to be met immediately. The 10 count helps create space and distance between the feeling and whatever action that you're getting ready to do that will be detrimental to who you are, what you stand for, and where you believe God is taking you. Take a 10 count. Breathe in and breathe out. Watch what will happen. You'll begin to not only lower your blood pressure, but you'll also say, hey, wait, okay, let me figure this out. The third thing is this: play out the consequences. If you act on this lust, if you do what this dog wants you to do in the moment, play out the consequences. Play out the fact that if you do this, you could lose your marriage. Play out the fact that if you do this, you could lose your church. Play out the fact that if you do this, everything you stand for could come into question. Before you act on it, go into your mind and play out the consequences. And then now come back into the present and ask yourself, is it worth it? These are just a few tips and tools on how to manage urges more successfully. And the last thing that I want to hit on, which I think is also vital to us being successful with mastering the dog, is called a safe space. One of the reasons why lust is so prevalent and lust is so strong is because we do not have a safe space within the church, or sometimes even within our home, to talk about what we're dealing with. Most men suffer in silence because they don't have somebody else they can talk to. What I've experienced in my life is that in order for me to alleviate the power that the dog has within, I gotta have somebody else to talk to. Now, I want to define what a safe space is. A safe space is one person that you can talk to and have honest conversations with, where there is no judgment, where you don't judge them and they don't judge you. Now, I gotta clarify something. If you are a married man, you cannot find a safe space with a female who is not your wife or who is not your family member. Because what happens is when we begin to confide our deepest, darkest feelings with someone from the opposite sex who's not in our family or who is not our spouse or is not our girlfriend, it's actually an unsafe space. Why? Because that becomes a liability to the relationship or to the marriage. in this safe space, you got to have at least one other person. Again, it could be your wife, ideally, your girlfriend, or another female family member, or another guy. A guy that you can have honest conversations with. And let me tell you from experience, having a safe space where I can talk to somebody and say, yo, dude, let me tell you what's going on, man. I need you to pray with me and for me. Because, man, listen, I travel a lot. I love my wife, man, but when I get on the road, it just seems like the dog barks louder. Now, y'all don't have to say amen. I know you're saying amen in your spirit. Pray with me. Let me at least talk about it, because once I have an outlet, it allows me to deal with it. I do believe that as a church and as a faith community, we have to start creating safe spaces. And part of that safe space is not judging someone when they struggle or removing them in a situation where I know of situations where somebody admits, hey, I struggle with lust, and they're removed immediately from their position in the church. I know situations where husbands have gone to their wives and said, hey, honey, I'm struggling, and then she turns her back on him. For us to be the community that God has called us to be, and for us to create the safety that's required to have the health that he knows that is possible, we can't judge each other for our struggle, because we all struggle. And we have to create an environment where it's okay to communicate and it's okay to exchange ideas in love. I believe that without transparency, there can be no transformation. So in order for us to transform into who God has called us to be, we have to not only be transparent, but we can't be afraid to communicate. I love it in the Bible. There was so much judgment about who Jesus hung around with. But at the end of the day, he said, listen, they need to know that even if they are doing something that I may not approve of, I still love them. Because if they don't know that I love them, they will never know who I really am. And this is why I do believe that mastery is the solution. And if we as a community can get back to real love, love that allows us to talk, love that allows the capacity for truth, and love that doesn't condemn or judge, then I believe we will be in a situation. Not only will we get power over what the enemy wants to use to destroy us, but we will begin to create a model by which the next generation doesn't have to suffer as much as we did. Thank you.